talking about today is digital stereo projection. And since all of you guys have been seeing it in action here, I probably don't actually have to tell you why we want to do it. There are a lot of wonderful technologies out there. 3D TVs are making a big difference in the stereo world, and they're going to make a much bigger difference. But there's really no other way of sharing all of the wonderful images we take and the shows we make except through stereo projection. If you want to show it to more than 5 or 6 people, you're going to end up projecting your images. Now, one of the very first questions that comes up in this hobby, especially in the electronics part of it, is this a good time to spend the money on this? 4 years ago, when I paid $7,000 for projectors that would cost $900 today, I thought maybe, maybe not. Today, we've reached a point in the development of the equipment where the resolution, which is the HD standard, the 1920 by 1080, is good enough for showing 3D to very large audiences. You're going to see 1920 by 1080 projection on the 9-foot by 16-foot screen in Stereo Theater tonight. If you buy equipment that meets these specs, you're probably going to be happy with it for maybe 5 years, which is about as long a lifespan as you could possibly ask for a piece of technical equipment. Things may change, but the basic functionality will be okay. The major components for doing digital projection are not much different than it were for film projection. We still have to have the projectors, the polarizers, the screen. The difference is we're throwing in a PC and we're throwing in some software, which oddly enough is actually about the toughest part of the whole process. There are 2 technologies that can be used for digital projection that are cost effective. There are several others out there. But you're either using LCD or you're using DLP. Now, LCD in some ways are lighter, brighter, and cheaper. They only have one minor problem. These 3 little LCD panels around there all inherently polarize light. This cube prism that's used to combine the image from those 3 prisms also inherently polarizes light. This means that there are very few LCD projectors that you can put another polarizing filter in front of and not either block the light or shift the colors. So effectively, we can't use these projectors. There are a couple of exceptions, but they're very rare. What we're probably going to use are DLP projectors, and we're going to use the consumer ones, which use this color wheel here. They're a very simple system, actually. The first time the people at TI, a researcher down there, showed me a prototype chip, I thought it was a practical joke. It's a little tiny chip about 1 inch by 1 inch that has several million tiny little mirrors on it that reflect light. It's an absolute miracle of microengineering. There is actually an extremely simple solution to digital stereo projection. That is to buy a stereo DLP projector. Now, all this is a DLP projector that has a high enough frame rate that you can show the left and right images sequentially, 120 hertz, 240 hertz, something of that nature. Other than that, it's exactly like any other DLP projector. Just need the high frame rate. There's no alignment. You can play Blu-ray movies. If you don't mind, I'll take questions toward the end of this. You can play Blu-ray movies. You don't need a silver screen, which is actually a big advantage. And they cost about the same thing as a single standard normal projector. So, what's the problem? It's not these pretty glasses. They're very effective and they work really well. The problem is this little line right down here. The cheapest glasses that work with DLP stereo projectors that I know of today are $80 a pair. So let's see, if I were using them for this presentation, it would cost me $6,000 for glasses. Until the price of the glasses come down, this is not going to be a practical way of doing stereo projection for large groups. 2 or 3 years from now, when those glasses cost $5 or $6, we may give up all of this dual projector nonsense and go to using a very simple and clean stereo projection methodology. But right now, $80 to $150 per pair, and they're quite fragile, and you have to keep the batteries charged. Other than that, it's a wonderful system. So what are we going to do? We're going to do dual DLP polarized projection, like George has set up here, as like you were seeing in the earlier workshop. We have 2 projectors, one mounted on top of the other typically, and it's a system that works extremely well. It's very much like we did with the Ectograph film projectors. You have a wide range of resolutions, including HD and the HD+. They use the same polarized glasses we've always used, and they really don't cost that much. You can buy a nice pair of HD projectors for under $2,000 today. And if you put it in perspective, that's less than one RBT projector. So it's actually not that expensive. Probably the question I get asked the most often when somebody's talking to me about this is, how do I choose a projector? Well, in the real world, we're going to all start with cost, right? We have a cost target that's the most money we can afford to spend, or that our wives will let us spend, or our husbands, and we have to shoot toward that. So let's zero in on that cost by running through the other features of these projectors. The one that everybody focuses on is resolution, and it is the most important decision you're going to make. Now, there are resolutions out there that are lower than 1024 by 768, especially the little Pico projectors, the cute little cubes that you can hold in the palm of your hand. They're not worth bothering with, though. They really aren't good enough to do anything that you can't do with a 3D TV, and you want to be able to do better than that. So the low end is 1024 by 768. That's what George's projectors here are, and as you saw in the previous workshops, they actually work very well for doing stereo projection on screens of about this size. You wouldn't use them for stereo theater, though I remember when Ron Labby showed up with his original pair, we were all oohing and aahing over the marvelous images he was projecting with projectors that were no better than that. They were 1024 by 768. The minimal HD is 1280 by 720, and for a while there were a lot of those on the market. You'll still find them. I wouldn't bother with it. It's not enough cost difference between a 1280 by 720 and a true HD at 1920 by 1080 projector. Now, for me, this is the sweet spot. This is the official, pretty much cast in iron standard for 3D TV all over the world. So if you're producing shows or you're set up to project shows and you use that resolution, it's going to work on the HD projectors, the HD TVs, a wide range of applications. You can go to HD Plus, which has a big string of initials as the real name, but these are 1920 by 1200, like John Hart used at the Stereo Theater last year at the NSA. They do have a problem, though. And the problem is aspect ratio. When you set up to project on a screen, you have to decide the shape of that screen. Traditionally, most of our screens were set up for something roughly 4 by 3 projection, meaning that it was 4 feet across and 3 feet high would be a 4 by 3 screen. The screen that the NSA uses for stereo theater is a 16 by 9 screen, and it literally is. It's 16 feet across and 9 feet high. When you pick your projector and it has a 4 by 3 resolution and you show it on the NSA screen, you're going to either make a choice. You're either going to have black bars, material going over the top and bottom, or you're going to have black bars on the sides. If you fix something that's exactly the right aspect ratio, it will exactly fill the screen. But what happens if you go to this much better resolution? That's it, WUXGA. That's quite a mouthful. It's much higher resolution, but if we show it on the NSA screen, guess what? We get black bars on the sides again. I remember a few years ago when John Roll showed medium format 3D projection, big roll-up projectors, fantastic resolution. And right after him, someone was showing full-frame RBT slides on the same screen. The medium format actually had, 4 times or 8 times the pixel density of the 35 millimeter. But on the screen, it looked like the 35 millimeter was better because it filled the screen. The medium format did not for the same height. These are nice projectors, and I know our friends at the ISU are buying them, but personally, I wouldn't do it. I would stick with the 1920 by 1080. Probably the most complex subject to talk about with projectors is brightness. And the reason is all the manufacturers lie, guys. You remember that color wheel I showed you? It has the segments, and the DLP works by putting up a red, green, and blue, or maybe 4 or 5 different colors. Well, most high-end projectors have a clear segment in there. It's clear glass. And it's used to boost the brightness on images, on color, the absolute brightness. Because if you put white up, your eye registers it as a very bright color. If you put red right after it, you say, gee, that was a very bright red. So these people were measuring the brightness of the projectors through the clear filter. Nothing to do with what it looked like when you put an image up. So they came up with something called ANSI lumens. And ANSI is a standards organization. And this is a standard way of measuring the brightness from a projector. And if you want to compare two projectors, and one says it has 1,500 ANSI lumens, and one says it has 3,000 ANSI lumens, there's a 90% chance that the 3,000 ANSI lumens is brighter than the 1,500 ANSI lumens. I won't go beyond that. The usable brightness is a fraction of the published brightness. To put this in perspective, if you had an ectograph projector with the ultra-high bright EXR bulbs, the Jobbies that had a 25-hour lifespan, it's the equivalent of about 1,500 ANSI lumens. So if you kind of put that in the back of your mind, a DLP projector that says it's 1,500 ANSI lumens would be about the same brightness. You really wanted to watch the brightness numbers, and you don't want to get something that's too bright. If you were sitting in here, I have a set of projectors that have 3,500 to 4,000 lumens. They're very bright. If we were projecting on this screen with them, I would have to put neutral density filters in front of the polarizers to cut the ghosting down, because as you increase the brightness of the projectors, the ghost, the crosstalk between the images, increases at the same time. And since that is an absolute number, not a relative number, if you're using too bright a projector, it actually creates problems for stereo projection. Another thing that will sneak up on you is the fact that these projectors, at least, and I'm talking about the consumer grade projectors, if you can spend $15,000 to $25,000 on it, forget everything I'm saying, because none of it applies. You can get some really nice equipment. Most of us are not going to buy a pair of those, though. These things are actually designed for boardrooms. They're designed to be sitting on this table, projecting on a screen right there at the end of it. So they have a built-in lens shift. Notice this is the center line of the lens, and it's pointing here way down below where the image goes. It also has a relatively short lens throw. This happens to be the specs for the projectors we're using in stereo theater. They're Optima EH1020s. They have a maximum projection distance of 10 meters, which is just under 33 feet. If you try to project further than that, you will not be able to focus the image on the screen. So in practical terms, it means the projectors are always going to be like these, sitting at the front of the audience, or 2 or 3 rows back. You have to kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Worse, some of the projectors have a throw of about 20 feet. So now you're talking about something that has to be very close. So what you have to decide is, what size screen am I going to be using? Go to this chart, and every projector manufacturer will have it in their manual, and they're all online, and find out, will my projector fill that screen from the distance I'm going to be using it at? Probably the biggest hassle in setting up to do digital stereo projection is aligning the projectors. You have 2 projectors, one sitting on top of each other, and you have to get the 2 images aligned perfectly for good stereo projection. Now, the features you want to look for in the projector in the specs, first of all, if it doesn't have vertical keystone correction, digital vertical keystone correction, don't buy it. It's a useless projector for stereo. It's a requirement. If it has horizontal keystone correction, this is a really good idea. If you're spending a lot of money and you can get projectors that have lens shift, which is like the way the RBT works, you just have 2 little knobs to turn and you can move the image around, that's wonderful, but you're probably not going to be able to afford it. You're going to see a lot of other features in the manuals and in the spec sheets, like it'll say horizontal and vertical image shift, and that you can do this with the image on the screen. Doesn't that sound wonderful for aligning it up? What they don't tell you is they achieve that by reducing the size of the image to create a black border around it, and then moving the image around in that black border. So you kill the resolution of the projector and you distort the image. The only feature you can use to do alignment with digital projectors, the only 2 features, are vertical and horizontal keystone correction. Anything else is a no-go. Some niceties in the ease of use range. When I say a standard projector rack, will it fit a standard projector rack? Remember the old Keystone projector racks we put the ectographs in? You can buy those for $20 or $30 on eBay. If you buy a projector small enough to mount in one of those racks, you have solved your projector mounting and alignment problem in one throw, because they have all kind of nice adjustment knobs and twists and turns to get them lined up. An RS-232 remote control is nice if you're doing shows like Stereo Theater, because it will let you put the projectors at the front and have the PC and things running it in the back. The multi-unit remote is only available on a few projectors, but it's wonderful. Most of these projectors have the same remote control frequencies. So if I stand back and I want to dim one projector, brighten the other one, or make an adjustment to it, both of them respond at the same time. If you can get a projector that has a multi-use remote control that you can assign projectors to it, that's a big plus. The last one is very often overlooked. Be sure and look at the noise specs on these projectors. In a quiet room where you're playing some nice piece of music as the background of your show, an 80 dB projector is a real distraction, and the voice noise range varies tremendously with the projectors. It's easy to get lost if you start looking at the back of the projector and all of the connectors back there. I mean, this is the back of one of the projectors we're using in Stereo Theater. What you need to focus on is you only need two connectors. You need a VGA in connector, and you need either an HDMI connector or a DVI connector to the projector. Everything else is superfluous and you can get by without it. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second for a little personal rant. VGA is an old standard developed by IBM about a zillion years ago when I was in computing. And it's an analog standard, meaning that the signals that travel down the cable are analog. They're a voltage that varies with the intensity of the image. What we have on the computer is a digital image. It's a number. Each pixel is represented by a number. So in the computer graphics card, use VGA, we convert that number into three analog voltages, a red, green, and a blue. We send it down a cable to a digital projector, which then converts it back into a digital number. Along the way, the colors get messed up because the exact output of that VGA chip varies depending on the batch it was in. Even on the same video card, you may get slightly different colors from the same VGA outputs on the same card. You don't want to use this unless it's an absolute emergency. You need it because there will always be some cases where you'll have something that you can only project with VGA, but you don't want to use it. You want to use the HDMI or DVI cable. It takes a digital number in the computer, it moves it as a digital number to the projector, and the projector then puts it up on the screen. Much, much nicer. The other thing you want to watch out for when you're doing digital projection is the mode the projector is running in. Now, when you go out to sell a projector, what happens? You walk into a store, and here's a row of projectors projecting up on a screen. And the average person will walk down that line, and they will go to the brightest image that they see and say, ooh, I like that. Well, the projector manufacturers know this. We're attracted to bright, shiny objects. So they have a mode, a default mode in the projector that is the brightest possible colors. Like this image on the side here. See how bright that is? I mean, these are simulations, of course, because I couldn't know what these projectors are actually going to do. This is running in sales mode. Now, it's probably called PC mode or something in the projector itself, but basically it's sales mode. There's another mode in that projector called sRGB mode. In the older projectors, it may be called graphics mode, but in any case, it's a calibrated sRGB color output. This is the mode you want to run in all the time, even though you may have to set it up in the projector every time you turn it on, like mine. Even worse, notice this image has some rather strange color variations in it. Well, a lot of these guys, in order to pump up their numbers for brightness, will drop out a few colors. And if you drop out a few colors, you can make the image look brighter. Now, if you're looking at a photograph, you're probably not going to see a great big band of light across there like that. But there may be something just as bad that you're not quite noticing. The reds don't look quite as they should because some of the reds are missing and they've substituted others. The blue sky isn't a gradient. It's got some bands in it that you don't know where they came from. It's because you're running in the projector in the wrong mode. Now, what happens sometimes is you sit here and you put your image up, you turn the projector on, and you switch modes. And you say, ugh, this sRGB mode is awful. The color is not a third as bright as it was when I had it in sales mode. But if you let your eyes adjust and you start looking at the picture, you'll suddenly see, you see the detail in the skies, you see all the little fine image details coming out. It's definitely the only way to run the projectors. The other problem that comes up big time is we don't have a lot of control over the source material, right? Somebody comes up with a show and it's done 1024 by 768. We have 1920 by 1080 projectors. There's a strong temptation to adjust the projector's resolution instead of adjusting the show's resolution. Now, we have a chain here of programs like Stereoscopic Player or Stereo Photo Maker that will take any image and produce almost any size from it. I use Stereo Photo Maker when I'm projecting slides because it does a particularly nice job of this. You pay a lot in lost detail when you start playing around with the resolution of the projector. So you always want to run the projector in its native resolution and do the changes to the scaling in one of the steps of the software programming. By choice, you want to talk to the person who produced the program and tell him, change your program to the same resolution I'm using. Right now it's a pain, but as we all get to 1920 by 1080 as a standard, it will become very easy to do. Lining the two projectors up, as I go to different clubs and things, I think the worst problem that I see is the projectors aren't aligned. And depending on your sensitivity to stereo problems, you know, how much it bothers you, this is or is not an issue. What you need to do it right is a couple of alignment slides, like these, that have rectangular sized blocks of exactly the same size. And if you don't own a set of these and you want to try this shughes.com/3D, about a week after we get back from this convention, there'll be a set of these alignment slides posted so that anybody can download them there. The way you go about setting this up can make this a simple job or a nightmare job. Now, the way you do it without it being a nightmare is take one projector, and I usually use the bottom projector, and fix it to the stand, because you're not going to mess with this projector. Have the other projector turned off or have a card blocking the lens or something. Set the image on the screen until it's exactly the size you want it on your screen. And I like to fill the screens, that's what I almost always do. And then fix the horizontal keystone arrows. We're all familiar with vertical keystoning, right? Maybe not. Okay. When you project an image on the screen, it tends to look like this toward the top. It gets broader as you go to the top. That's vertical keystoning. And you can see it, this George has done a real good job of setting this up, so you don't really see it here. But on projectors you will. Vertical keystoning actually doesn't do much damage to a 3D image, especially if both projectors are the same. But you have something else. If the projector, if that's the screen and this is the projector, and you have the projector turned like this toward the screen, then you will get horizontal keystoning, where one side of the image is narrower than the other side of the image. Well, what happens, remembering Bill's Windows presentation, what happens if those two images happen to be slightly different sizes at one end? You have a disparity in the image from the right to the left that creates a different stereo window. So if you put something up that would be exactly at the stereo window and it's keystoning in this direction, it's going to go behind the stereo window. So you end up with something that instead of being a rectangle looks kind of like this. And you'll see that a lot when people are setting up stereo projection. So the first thing you do is fix the horizontal keystone error, and you don't do it by turning the projector. This makes it worse. You do it by getting the projector lined up horizontally to the screen and then moving it like this, like you were doing a cha-cha shot. You don't ever turn the projector when you're trying to correct this problem. Once you get that done, fix the vertical keystone error, hopefully using the built-in correction in the projector. Then turn on the second projector, never touch the first projector again, and align the second image to the first image. Make sense to everybody? So, I'm going to go over this again. It's a big sore point for me. So if you had this image up on the screen, the first thing you would do is get this height right in the center, lined up to the center of the screen as best you could. Then you would look at the edges, look at these boxes, and see if the box at this side was the same height as the box at this side. If it was not the same height, Then you would move the projectors like this until you got them even with the screen, centered, and got the errors out. That's how you take out the horizontal keystoning errors. At that point, you look at the boxes at the bottom and the boxes at the top and see if they're the same height. If they're the same height, then you've taken out the vertical keystoning problems. At that point, with a grid like this, you can tell exactly how well aligned your projectors are. So what would I buy if I were buying something today? Obviously 1920 by 1080, nothing under 2000 lumens. Anything under 2000 lumens is going to be too dim for projection in any large size screen. You need either an HDMI or a DVI connector and a VGA connector. I recently did a survey of all the projectors out there, or as many as I could find, and I came up with the Optima EH1020 as my choice today. It's a 1920 by 1080 projector. It's 3000 ANSI lumens. It has a wonderful 4,000 hour bulb life. And when you go to replace the bulbs in one of these, you're going to lay out somewhere between $200 and $600, so bulb life is kind of important. By the way, that's cheaper than the old slide projector bulbs. They cost about $1 an hour to run. These cost about 20 cents an hour to run, something like that. And they sell for under $1,500 today. I've seen them as low as $1,250. So this is an excellent projector choice if you're thinking about a new set of projectors. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a second. Does anybody have any questions about projectors that they would like me to cover?
On these, how well will they work for projecting, images, say, from movie, television, whatever?
These projectors will do an excellent job with video. I routinely use mine to show 3D movies, like the Sensio formatted things, and some HD quality video that friends have sent me that I've been able to project, dual projection, that's just true theater quality, as good as the real D screens in my opinion. So they'll work really well for video.
Okay. I forgot my notes, so I probably have the wrong term, but I saw something about a distinction in DLP projectors between, is it a 1-chip and a 3-chip, or one?
Yeah, that's a good question. The 3-chip projectors are sufficiently expensive, I didn't cover them. They will typically be in the $10,000 plus range, but instead of that rotating color wheel, they work like the LCD projector and have 3 separate projector chips, red, green, and blue filters. They also often have the same polarization problem, by the way, because they use that cube. Okay, I got to move on glancing at my timer. Well, no, sorry. Configuring a PC. Now you're sitting here and you're running with a notebook these projectors and they look great, right? You're able to do shows like this without any trouble at all. Why would you need more than that? It's a really good question. It depends on what you're trying to do. Some of these things require large amounts of processing power. The bottom line, by the way, that you should take away from this is don't try to create a PC that will be good for your office use and anything else. It's only going to be good for 3D projection if you set it up correctly. I've had a lot of people ask me, I saw somebody using their notebook and it worked great, so why do I need to go out and buy this fast PC? Well, you need to go out and buy this fast PC because of an interesting phenomenon. If I'm putting up two 1920 by 1080 images on the screen, I am moving somewhere over 370 megabytes of data a second between my PC and those projectors, because that's what it takes to do 30 frames of 1920 by 1080 video. Obviously, we don't store gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes of data for our shows. We store in highly compressed formats, and then we decompress those formats in real time when we're showing our movie or our show. It's the decompressing of those formats that takes the CPU power. If I'm trying to show two full resolution movie streams, I need at least a 4 CPU processor running at a pretty high CPU rate. If I'm showing a stereo photo maker slideshow, I can do it with a notebook. So if you're going to do everything, if you want to project everything with these guys, you're going to need an extremely powerful PC. I also get a lot of questions of why are you recommending a gaming style video card, since all we're doing is projecting things. The answer to that is even simpler. Power DVD and several other programs use the NVIDIA, in particular, GPU chips to do processing power. They don't use it just as a video card. They use it as a processing feature of the processor to decode video. If you're going to do Blu-ray, if you're ever going to play Blu-ray movies, You're almost certainly going to need a hardware decoding system, and NVIDIA cards work very well. So my recommendations, an Intel i7-860. Now, in the good old days, you looked at a CPU chip, and if it was a 386, it was better than a 286, right? And if it was a 12 megahertz, it was better than a 10 megahertz. That's not true anymore. The internal organization of these CPU chips, especially the multiple CPU chips, and you need at least a 4 CPU chip for your processor, are optimized for different jobs. This particular family, the Intel i7-860s, are optimized for handling what we think of as digital show data. They're optimized for doing the kind of calculations we do to produce digital video. You need 4 gigabytes of really fast memory. That's about the minimum you're going to buy on a PC anyway. You want to think a long time about more. If you put 8 gigabytes on, you have to run a 64-bit operating system, which sounds okay, until you discover that half the codecs, the programs that decode this video, only run in 32-bit mode. So you suddenly find yourself not using any of that expensive memory you bought. You need a couple of really fast hard drives to get the data off, and 2 10,000 RPM Raptor drives are perfect. This gives you like a 300 gigabyte disk drive system. Doesn't actually cost that much, and they're fast enough. You see a lot of funky specs on hard drives. It can move 3 gigabits a second or something. Yeah, but that's for 100th of a second. In stereo, when we're showing a movie, we need to be moving data consistently with no pauses for maybe 2 hours at a time. So you need good fast hard drives in RAID 0. An NVIDIA GeForce GTX 260 or better card. There's a magic thing there. A friend of mine at NVIDIA has been giving me a little feedback on some of their new 3D programs. This is the minimum level card that can do their 3D surround, where they can actually project on 3 3D displays at the same time. So you could have like a gaming system where you have 3D monitors all the way around you. I mean, you don't want to limit what you can do by buying the wrong thing. The difference between this card and the one just underneath it is about $30. So you definitely want to buy the better card. You want a Blu-ray reader, of course, and sadly, you want a dual boot PC. We all use these programs like Wings, Platinum, and ProShow executables, which only work in one special mode called span mode, and it's only supported in Windows XP. So you end up having to have that to run these older shows, but you need Windows 7 or Vista, and I would never load Vista on the PC, to run Stereoscopic Player well and to run some of the NVIDIA 3D stuff. Polarizers. A lot of people talk about linear or circular. I have a large aperture photometer, which is simply a very expensive, highly calibrated light meter. It's got a sensor about, oh yay big on the end of it. So just for the fun of it, I set my projectors up with linear filters and with circular polarizers. And I started measuring the ghosting and the light feed through from them. And I found no difference. The linear polarizers I was using and the circular polarizers I was using, they didn't ghost more, they weren't significantly brighter, they were pretty much identical. So you can use either one you want. If you want to play with circular polarization, but you don't want to spend $300 or $400 to buy a set of filters, go out to the web and go to a company called polarization.com. Polarization.com. They will sell you a set of 4-inch filters, left and right-handed circular filters, for $25. Now, this is just the material. You'll have to mount it on a cardboard frame or something. But with that, it works great with the Real D glasses. You can play around with doing circular polarization either with your film projectors or your DLP projectors without spending a fortune on it and make up your own mind which one you like. They're perfectly good filters, by the way, except that because they have no coatings on them, they'll only last maybe 5 or 6 months. So you're buying something to experiment with, not to use ongoingly. The one real gotcha here, film projectors projected film, right? There was a little chip of film in there, in the light path, and the manufacturers knew this. So between the bulb and the film chip, there were IR reflective mirrors, heat absorbing glass, all kinds of stuff to take the heat, the infrared, and get it out of the path. Guess what? DLP chips are not particularly sensitive to heat. None of that stuff is in the DLP projector. So the beam coming out of the DLP projector is extraordinarily hot compared to the beam coming out of the film projector. You need to cool your polarizers. or you need to space them away from the projector as far as you can, or you'll have a very short lifespan on those filters. Okay, this is the hard part. The rest of this is actually pretty straightforward. Buy the projectors, set the stuff up. It's no rocket science in there. The hard part is getting the software to work, and it's hard because we use a dozen different formats amongst ourselves. We use ProShow, we use Wings. I've seen PowerPoint presentations done in stereo. I've done one myself. We use all kinds of things. So you're going to need software on this computer, and you're going to need a range of it. Now, if you pick the following three programs: Stereoscopic Player, which is for sale, but the license is like $50 or something; Stereo Photomaker, which is free; and Stereo Movie Player, and you load these on your PC, you're going to be able to show 99.9% of all the stuff anybody ever hands you, if you also install this series of codecs down here. Because here's where the problem comes up. These are programs. They know how to take data and put it up on the screen in stereo. Unfortunately, remember we were talking a little bit about compression rates? You have a file that's only 1 gigabyte and it has enough data in it to feed projectors that need 370 gigabytes a second of data. Well, we compressed all of that data and we put it in different formats when we compressed it. These are called codecs. Encoder, decoder, compressor, decompressor, whatever definition you want. They're the little bit of software that knows how to take that file format and get the data out of it so this program up here can project it. So you'll start to run something, and one of these programs, Stereoscopic Player or Stereo Movie Player, will pop up a little box that says, I don't recognize this file format, or I don't have the codec that I need to do it with, and you have to go out and download them. In the back of your handout is a list of codecs and places to go get them, okay? These are the codecs that I would install on your PC. The DivX Pro codec, which costs you $19.95. The XVID codec, which is free. The QuickTime Pro codec, which I think is $29. I haven't bought it in a while. And then you run into a little stumbling block. If you want to play DVDs, like the Sensio format DVDs or the ones that are filled interlaced DVDs, you need a commercial DVD decoder codec, because those guys are encrypted. Commercial DVDs are encrypted, and you need a codec that knows about that encryption. The easiest way to do it is to buy a Power DVD, install it on your computer. It'll automatically install one of these codecs that works very well. And they just came out with a version that will play Blu-ray 3D. I haven't had a chance to try it, but supposedly it will do that job. Then we have the family of Windows codecs. When you install Windows, you're going to have several of these automatically installed, but people are going to send you programs that use versions of the codec that don't come with Windows. There's a site, again, there's a place in the back of there to go download all the extra Windows codecs you need to run all the Wings shows you're going to get. The last thing you're going to need is the AC3 filter. This is a sound control program that knows how to play the sound off of commercial DVDs. If you don't have it, you'll have beautiful video and you'll have no idea why you can't get the sound to work. If you take nothing away from this meeting today but this one sentence, it was worth coming to it. Do not, under any circumstances, install codecs from sites you don't trust. If you go out and do a web search and you find something that has exactly the codec the software said it wanted, don't download it. Codecs are particularly easy to embed viruses in. They're particularly easy to create something that will create havoc with your computer. Go from the people who created the codec or get the location from somebody you trust. When in doubt, send me an email. I can tell you where to find almost every one of them out there. The list in the back of the program book is trustworthy. If you download from there, you won't get into trouble. But never, ever pull these down. Don't download the wonderful codec pack that's free on the internet. God knows what's in it. Okay, guys? ProShow EXE files. This is a particular sore point you're going to run into when you start trying to do projection, because lots of people are going to send them to you. Now, ProShow EXE files are wonderful for commercial presentations like I used to do in boardrooms. 800 by 600 single projector. They're little tiny files. They're easy to run. But guess what? all of the effects, like the dissolves and the zooms and things, are rendered in real time. None of them are pre-computed. So it sits there and pulls up 2 images to do a dissolve, and it calculates 20 or 30 in-between images to show on the screen. Well, this works great at 800 by 600. It might work at 1024 by 768. It might not. You start getting a little bigger, and suddenly it only has time to encode. It only has time to encode 2 frames. So your nice dissolve suddenly looks like chunk chunk. You have all this stuttering going on. It's because of the fact that it renders these things in real time. When you create a show, as a projectionist, you have no control over this, though you can strongly encourage people to create the shows in video. Just take it as written that if you're showing pro-show executables, you're probably going to have problems. The other problem are what I call big monitor formats. Windows XP had a wonderful feature. You could define 2 external monitors as a single big monitor, so that the programs running in Windows saw not 2 monitors, but 1 big monitor. That's how ProShow does stereo. That's how Wings does stereo. It's how a lot of programs do. It's how you could do a PowerPoint presentation in stereo. The problem is they only work in Windows XP. That's why you have to have a dual boot system. So if you're going to try to play with those things, keep Windows XP on your system, or use something like the dual head-to-go card, which can sometimes solve this problem, but not always. The best thing is to use programs like Stereoscopic Player and My Album, which are stereo aware. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is the trickiest. When you set this PC up, you do not want to do not turn on automatic updates from Windows. Don't let anybody update this PC except yourself, because you're sitting there and magically Microsoft loads the latest version of their codec for Windows Media Player. Suddenly half the stuff you've set up quits working, guys, because they don't recognize the new version of the codec. You need to make this PC a dedicated PC and isolate it from the outside world. Just load the software yourself and don't let other people do it. The last thing to know is that it's actually a lot of fun. I know it sounds like a big hassle, and I keep bringing up problems here, but the truth is, once you get it all set up, it's very easy. You can show shows without any hassle. You can share it with your friends. You can take it to your club, whatever you want to do. I've got about 5 minutes. Any questions in 5 minutes?
We were trying to project some of those video style, and our computer couldn't keep up with it. The sound would drag behind it. How fast a computer do you have to have for the video?
The one that I was showing up here, the 2-point-something gigahertz 4-processor CPU is the minimum for showing video with sound. You might get away with something less than that on 1024 by 768. You might not. It depends on how the video is encoded on the bit rate. Even though you have something that says it's a .avi file or a .wmf file, that's like saying I'm a box or I'm a bottle. What's inside it can be radically different from one show to the next. It could be encoded at 10,000 bits per second or 50,000 bits per second. The faster the encoding, the more CPU you need. So you usually need a 4 CPU processor of at least 2.5 gigahertz to do full motion video.
Linear polarizers and circular polarizers. I assume that whatever you have, interrupting the light of the projector, like a circular one, you have to have circular polarizer glasses, or are they interchangeable?
No. They have to match. If you're going to use circular polarizers, the reason I even brought that up is almost all of us have several pair of Real D glasses that we did not put in the recycle bin, right? Right. So the temptation to play with the circular polarization is real high. They have to match, and even more than that, circular polarizations have something called quadrature, meaning that you have to turn the circular polarizers to where they're at the same rotational angle, or you'll get purple ghosts. You'll know right off if you have a problem. You'll see purple ghosts on the screen.
You mentioned that you needed Windows XP and you recommended a dual boot configuration. Does that work with the Windows 7 XP emulation mode?
No, it does not.
That's what I thought.
The video drivers that create span mode only work in a native XP configuration. I spent hours trying to get that to work because I hate having the dual boot configuration. It means that I'm sitting in the middle of a show and we have to have a break for 10 minutes while I reboot the whole PC. If anybody was here at Grand Rapids when we did stereo theater, a lot of people wondered, why are there these little 10 and 15 minute breaks in the course of this show. It was so we could reboot the PC and get the right drivers loaded and things like that. Well, thank you, guys. Oh, one more.
Just one more. The commercial movie theaters have a switchable circular polarizer.
They sure do.
I think there's at least one projector you can buy like that,
Yep.
but it's expensive.
It's too expensive for people like us to use unless you're millionaires. You're looking at $15,000 to $20,000. Now, nothing says somebody won't create one tomorrow, but
I think there's one like $5,000.
That's just the Z screen.
that's just the Z screen, not the projectors.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, pretty sure.
yesterday.
And remember, you need two. Remember that the light output really drops off from them, by the way. So a lot of them have a problem with light output using the non-commercial Z screens.
Just another comment. I have a couple of dual LCD projectors with the shift lens. I bought some polarizers from Itzik Weissman,
Right?
and they're very efficient.
Some LCD projectors will actually work. The biggest problem I've had is color shifts in them, by the way. It's not that they don't work, it's that they shift the colors around. Hey, thanks, everybody.